are there. Let's now jump into integration planning. As I mentioned in a few slides back, this was about the M&A stages. Now we look at, based on each of the stages, how is integration planning, how should that be conducted, right? So the first one is where we talk about the deal pipeline review and target assessment. So this is around the deal sourcing during that stage. So there has to be a strategic lens definition, right? So if you find a company, how are you going to go about integrating and consolidating the acquired company, the target company, into the acquiring company? And that's very important, because this is where you start reviewing all of the reviewing a target organization through an integration lens. So as I mentioned, most companies end up doing a financial due diligence or a tax due diligence or a legal due diligence, but not many companies would do an integration lens due diligence. And that's where this particular slide becomes that much more important. So this is where you start looking at an integration, or looking at a consolidation and acquisition through an integration lens, right? Once the target has been selected, this is where you start going down into details, capabilities, talent, and skills. You look at some of your in-flight projects, especially if the company has a large R&D or innovation component of their cost of operations. This is where you would like to see what are the in-flight projects. You would like to see the costs and budgets, etc., and also evaluate potential opportunities by which you can get some revenue synergies, some cross-pollination, development of new products, etc. Once the deal is signed, and between signing and actual closing, this is where you would get into the details of integration planning, rationalization, and then between the deal's closing and the XX days, it typically is the 100 days, final validation, detailed design, initiate integration. You'd also like to cover a lot of the actual components of an integration. And then beyond the XX days, you would start looking at additional optimization opportunities. So this is kind of integration by stages on a page. As I mentioned in the previous slide, so during the strategy lens definition, you look at an overview of aspiration, capabilities, and market setting. You look at some of the undesirable elements. For example, target should not have a certain, let's say, certain characteristics, or target should not have. That's also important, as important as what a target should have. So this is your strategy lens definition. Then you talk about the organization and operational assessment. This is where you talk about people, culture, leadership, organization, all of that stuff. You then look at integration design and planning. So this is where you start tightening some of the scope of work that's going to be part of the integration. You start translating the strategy objectives into functional objectives or into business objectives, and then you get into stage 4, which is closing and validation. So this is where, and by the way, I've mentioned validation here. Very few organizations do actually end up validating many of the assumptions that were made during due diligence, and that is a recipe for disaster. So that's why it is important that when closing and validation actually takes place, that organizations do go over all the assumptions that were made during the actual deal sourcing. And then the last one is new value creation opportunities. And here I've mentioned about a couple of things: key customer journeys. So this is essentially for cross or upselling, right? So you start looking at certain customers where there's going to be a cross-selling. You have to define how you're going to sell to a potential new customer, how you're going to sell to that particular customer, right? So this is where you would have some parts of the journey being done by the acquiring team and some part of the journey being done by the acquired team. So once you do the customer journeys, it's a great visualization of how that actual process is going to work between the two organizations. Okay. Now let's look at what are some of the acquisition rationale, right? So, of course, we start with value creation and integration strategy, right? So, first, of course, is realize synergies, protect revenue. So, these are the ones where when we start looking at the integration planning, the integration planning framework, these are some of the things that we look at. So realize synergies, of course, protect revenue, yeah. Then we start looking at people and leadership strategy. What's going to be the people and leadership strategy? How many people are going to be made redundant? What are the new positions that are going to be there, etc.? And those are the ones that kind of drive the integration imperatives. And if you look at the integration imperatives, you will start seeing more details. DD validation, leadership assessment, go to market, management system and decision making. What sort of change management are we going to put in place? And then there are two other things where we start looking at what are the business objectives going to be, and what are some of the objectives of consolidation and integration are going to be. So overall, this kind of summarizes an acquisition rationale, right? So we look at different aspects. We look at the value creation and integration strategy, which is realize synergies, protect revenue, people and leadership strategy. Then we look at how the strategic objective then converts into a business or a functional objective. And then we look at how the consolidation and integration is going to be done. And all of these combined together drive the integration imperatives. Okay. Next section, very, very important, communication. So this is kind of a communication on a page. So essentially, during communication, you first start with who are the different people who needs to be informed or communicated to. So it's whether it's employees, customers, suppliers, partners, alliances, distributors, and shareholders, whosoever is there. Government agencies could be another one that are part of the audience, right? The second part is the content, message content, languages, legal checks. So for example, if you operate in multiple countries, you need to make sure that you're covering in local languages. You also need to make sure that whatever you say in your announcement, especially when you are dealing with external parties like your customers, suppliers, government agencies, you also need to make sure that they are legally vetted, but they're also vetted through an HR lens. Make sure that it does not create too much anxiety amongst employees, etc. The third section is medium, right? So whether they're going to be physical copies of mails that are going to be sent out, whether they're going to be things on bulletin boards, or there are going to be announcements, press releases, there could be intranet emails, what's going to be the medium that's going to be followed. Now, typically in an integration, you have multiple medium that are followed. So you may have an email coming from your business leader about an acquisition. You may have a town hall, which is going to be there where there are some presentations made, etc. You would also have press release, which comes out in your local newspaper or some of the internet-based newspapers, etc. The two other aspects that are important for communication, one is the timing. What time of the day for the communication? Which day? Is it a Monday? Is it a Friday? Should it be sent in the morning? Should it be sent in the afternoon, in the evening? If you're a global company, what time is a good time to send it out, etc. It also depends whether you want to send something before Christmas or in the new year or before a festival or after a festival. So you may want to decide upon the date and the timing of communication. And then finally, because it involves so many different people, we need to absolutely have a complete description of roles and responsibilities, right? So who's the one who is actually going to create the content of the communication, whether it's an email, whether it's a newspaper press release, whether it's a town hall presentation deck? Who's the one who creates it? Who's the one who reviews it? Who's the one who sends it? So most often the an email maybe gets sent from the CEO of a company, but usually the presentation deck or the content is created by a marketing and communication team, etc. So all of these combined together, you then create a matrix. It could be in an Excel spreadsheet, or it could be in other format, on the basis of which you would create a combination of these five elements that will make your integration communication plan and delivery.